Jan, that I'm engaging. Having taught special education for 21 years at all grade levels, you have to adjust yourself to the audience and try to engage. Obviously, kindergarten lunch duty is different than 11th grade, study skills session. So I try to adjust myself to each audience. As Jan said, I really loved, well, I'm very appreciative of being here. It's not my first time here. I'm appreciative of coming back. I try to reach out to various parent groups and talk to them about some themes I see. And today's topic is one of the themes I do see more often than not, the need for it, which are strength-based IEPs. A little more about me. I have taught in a few local school systems, including Fairfax County. I still hold Virginia special ed teaching certification. I do family law support, education law support, advocacy support, and I've also branched out in the last year to supporting some school districts where I don't have clients to build their skill set on various topics. So I will get ready to share slides. I don't like to read word for word from slides per se, but this is a presentation I have given at least one other time, probably I think 2 times, but I try to adjust it, update it, add different nuances. So we're going to talk about ensuring strength-based IEPs. And I know a lot of districts are starting this week or started recently, or depending on where you are. Some people are coming back from vacation. Their children haven't quite started yet. So I'm going to get ready and start with the slides. And there's always I just kind of know there's always some kind of snafu when we share slides. So if you bear with me while I hit share again. And then Jan, if you could tell me if you see the slides, yes or no.
Yes.
Great. Okay. As we said, this is the title. It's Ensuring Strength-Based IEPs, and I'm just going to forward to the next one. These are today's topics. We're going to talk about what it is to have a strength-based IEP, why we need to include strengths in the IEPs, in any IEP, and the data collection. A lot of parents, I believe, aren't aware of the amount of data that is really right in front of them until it is pointed out. And then they start to see, oh, well, I could also add this, or I could collect data on that. The recent things I've seen the past couple years, I'll tell clients, take an audio clip of an interaction with your child, whether it's, for the younger scholars, whether you're reading a book with them, or whether it's a topic that you see, maybe a video online or something on YouTube, Discovery, Animal Planet, and your child is having a lot of really good conversations on a topic, just take an audio clip of that, because that is a really good data collection point. And then date it, save it, email it to yourself. And then at some point, your child's next IEP meeting or periodic review, you can share it. Those are really, really good pieces of information. Your child interacting with you on a sort of stress-free, low-stakes environment, very casual, but yet you can hear interactive, social skills. You can hear curiosity about a topic. You can hear vocabulary. So don't forget to look around at the data that you see about your child and the strengths that are right in front of you, but often we're not trained. I don't think I was trained when I was, first teaching, to really ask those questions to parents and find out more and dig deeper. So these are the 3 main focuses. We are going to also touch on the least restrictive environment. And while I know some scholars are in a more in a maybe more smaller, more structured setting where they're not interacting as frequently or as many hours a day with their non-disabled peers. If your child is moving towards having more time with non-disabled peers, that's a really good data collection sort of practice for you to have, and collecting data along the way for when you do have that least restrictive environment discussion at your child's meeting, because that is an area I think some school systems are still, the learning is still going on, and they're not quite up to maybe some other districts. I'm not saying your district or not. I'm just saying in certain districts, they're not yet there on the LRE. So let's move along. Why do we want to do this, and where do we start? What do we do? You think, oh, well, why would I want to share strengths with my child's team? They might cut back hours, or they might think, oh, well, they can read better than they thought, or they might go, oh, well, we're going to pull this service. I really want you to think sort of in the opposite, have the opposite mindset. The strengths are really a springboard to anchor instruction to find out what is sort of the inroad to your child's interests. So we're looking at preferences, we're looking at interests. And those are sometimes the same thing, but sometimes not. Background knowledge. Sometimes a child spends a lot of time with a grandparent or a cousin and they acquire knowledge about a certain topic. Skills, including social skills, including in the neighborhood, including at a place of religious worship, including at the library, including on a field trip. Hobbies, what do they like to do? Not every child, I remember I played tennis in elementary school. I wasn't particularly, I wasn't the best, but I enjoyed it. And there was at one point we moved to an area where there was just like a little tiny park nearby, and there was one little tennis court, and it wasn't really kept up too well. But I had a tennis racket, and sometimes I would just go up there and hit around, just a hobby, not anything I was great at, but something I did enjoy. And then community participation. Some children really like to be involved, whether it's in a neighborhood situation, whether it's in an activity on the weekends. All of these areas, we really want to stop and pause and think, what is our child or our teenager, or yeah, when I say child, I just mean your minor child. What are they doing when they're not in school that school would be really amazed to hear about? Because over the years, I found that many of my students, whether they were on an individualized education program or not, there's always like these hidden interest areas that I didn't know about. I had a ninth grader once in advisory. And for those of you, some school districts have advisory, some don't, where it's like a session where you have an advisor, which is basically every teacher in the building has sort of a and you meet with those students either daily for 20 minutes or weekly. Different schools have different models. I've had it in at least 3 different schools where I've done advisory. And one young lady who was very, very quiet, she asked me to write her recommendation for college. And I was like, sure, very well behaved, very sweet. And then I said, oh, I just want to know a little bit more about you, because she was so quiet. She would not share an advisory very much. I didn't think she had a lot of outside interest. And here to find out she was on a STEP team. She's like, oh yeah, our STEP team, we won states. I said, this is information you should be sharing. Your classmates would love to know this. This is amazing. Please let us know more about what's going on in your life. So you have some students who really are interested in a certain topic, and they're always on, YouTube learning about, starfish, or learning about trains, or learning about a certain part of history. Teachers would love to know that, and we'll get into a little bit more of the why, but really look at these things. Start thinking about what your child says, what your child does, what your child sort of gravitates to, and that is how you will start to assemble information on these areas. You're not going to assemble all this information in a day or a week or a month. This is continuing. This is through the summer. This is through extended school year. This is, over break. So just be thinking, and then think about ways you can introduce your child to additional areas. Maybe when you go to the zoo, or go to a museum, or go to a, volunteer at the pet shelter, or you're doing, you're helping out at church or synagogue or temple or whatever, and you see your child, be kind to an elderly person, or be kind to much younger children. That is a strength, because some children don't have those skills. So we take those for granted, like, oh, well, of course they're really good when we go visit, at the home, and they're always, so great with all the, patients. Well, there are some children that aren't great, unfortunately, with that same skill. So really accent it and give your child credit for everything they're doing. We really want teachers to hear, for any child on an IEP, for any child with an educational disability, that your child is capable. So we want to look at capabilities. What can they do in nouns and verbs, right? because I've heard in one too many IEP meetings, and I hope none of you have heard this. Well, we see this skill at school, but we can't really put it in the IEP because I know you say at home that they're doing math tutoring, they're doing this, or you say at home that there was, they have a lot of responsibilities with chores and they're very neat and organized and they take initiative, but we don't see that. Document it, put the date and the time, say, in the last month, Aiden has, voluntarily set the table, cleaned up the dishes, put away book bag, gotten out homework without prompting. Maybe that's a change from last year. Maybe that's the same, especially when you hear a teacher go, oh, well, they need prompting to start work. They need somebody to take initiative. When I hear those words, I'm like, maybe they're just waiting for permission to start. Maybe they don't need a prompt. Maybe if they had that sort of structure, they would know they're supposed to do that automatically. What do they do automatically at home? Think of these things because we really want teachers to see capabilities and move your child along in the continuum of progress so that they're not taking time teaching a skill or presenting a skill when your child's already demonstrating it at home and you just need to have that documentation. So, of course, they're not going to remove services because you're saying my child is capable of this. They're going to adjust services. They're going to change a goal. They're going to change the maybe the mastery level. But we really want to highlight capabilities. And I do hear parents go, well, if I tell them they do this, like I said at the beginning, I don't want their hours reduced. No, they'll give them a task that will move them closer to grade level. So we really want to look at what your child is capable of at home. And students need to have the message that we see them and we know that they have strengths. It could be a student who's really good at cooking, who knows a lot of cooking vocabulary, who knows geography, who knows how to they have a favorite poet. I had a student one year in tutorial, which is like a study skills class, was teaching in Howard County. Very quiet young man, very unassuming. And again, I'm not breaching confidentiality. And he came in one day and he said, I've been writing a lot of poems, Miss Capone. And I said, that's great. What does your English teacher have to say about your poems? And he says, I haven't told my English teacher. And I said, why not? Well, she hasn't asked me. It hasn't been an assignment. And I said, well, would you like to present one of your poems to our class, maybe on a Friday, and you have time to practice? And it wasn't a particularly easy audience. There were definitely some young scholars that might, say, oh, that doesn't sound good, or that they give him their honest opinion, but it was a friendly group. It was but um, some of them were his friends, but again, very quiet, very unassuming. Nobody knew that he was writing poetry. He's like, well, I want to do like poetry out loud, like a poetry slam. I said, oh, that's amazing. I said, make sure you tell your English teacher. So the following Friday comes, he chooses one of his works. Again, very quiet, very unassuming. Often you wouldn't even know the student is in class because he's that quiet. He got up, and when I tell you, it was one of the most amazing poems that I've ever heard from anybody presented with so much expression and so much emotion. And here to find out that he had gone through some family issues. And again, I'm not breaching confidentiality, but had really had some struggles and really embedded that in his poem and just the power of the delivery. And then he finished and he looked up kind of like, is that okay? And the students stood up and they clapped. And again, he needed that message that this is a strength. Then he can go to his English teacher and go, wow, in Miss Capone's tutorial, this, they really like this. I'd like to share some more poems. Give them that incentive that says, we see you, you're really good at this, and we want to help develop that skill. Math maybe wasn't his strength. Maybe science wasn't his strength. So he still needs support, and he probably needed support getting his English work turned in. He still needed support. However, we want to send him that message. You have strengths because they're seeing all these other children being acknowledged for their strengths. Every child has strengths. Every child needs to be acknowledged. Sadly, I was in an IEP meeting in the last few years, and I remember I'm not even going to say the county, and I probably don't want to recall the county. It was a Northern Virginia county, and the meetings that we had for this young scholar never contained a word of positivity or strength. And this child had strengths. So again, I'm not breaching confidentiality. I'm not calling anybody out, but I'm saying it happens because nobody took the time to look and say, wow, this child can do this, this, and this. Maybe they still need to work on this, this, and this, but that doesn't negate their strengths. If they have behavior issues, that doesn't negate their academic skills and vice versa. So again, we still want to send a message to every child. Wow, you're really good at this. This can give them that incentive to work on those skills that they don't have, strengths in those areas. So it's win-win. Because they go, well, we don't want to tell them they have strengths. They're not going to try as hard, or they're just going to rest on their laurels. No, they need to know that they are acknowledged. And we need to ask them what matters to them, what brings them joy. There was one student I had at a charter school in DC, and his behavior was, let's just say he was in early high school, and his behavior was presenting maybe more like an older student who really wasn't as invested. So I took him aside. I said, I really need to know what is important in your house? Who is important in your house? What do you take care of in your house? What possessions? He said, my grandmother and my chihuahuas. I said, I can work with that. That's great. Because his behavior at school sometimes wasn't perfect. Some of the teachers were coming to a couple of us on the special ed team saying, what can we do with so-and-so? How can we get him to do better? I said, wow. So the next time I needed to talk to a parent about some of my concerns, I said, oh, I think it's really wonderful that your son loves his grandmother and loves chihuahuas. And the mom kind of lit up and she was like, yes, that's so great. But he hangs around his older cousins on weekends and he picks up some of their behaviors, and we're still trying to work on that. So again, we want to make sure we're asking that student, what matters to you? Different answers for every student. Another student, books may be the most important thing. It's a comfort. It might not be the academic book that's going on in that class at that moment, but that's what matters to them. Because I've seen that more than once over the years where student has book with them everywhere, or student has whatever object with them everywhere. That can be a comfort item. So it's like, what brings them joy? What do they like? Maybe it's taking care of younger kids. Maybe it's reading, maybe it's crafts, maybe it's singing or dancing or science, but we still have to take the time and ask them, what do you like to do? Oh, why is that? Okay, that's really important. Put that in the present levels under strengths. When we stop and look at what is going on with a child after school and we step back, not even asking them, what are they interacting with? What do they gravitate towards? Who are they, are they looking on YouTube for dance videos? Are they looking, silly stuff like, whoever it is, Mr. Beast or whoever? Are they on Roblox? Do they always want to help cook dinner? Are they always wanting to walk the dog? Are they on, Animal Planet a lot where they really love to learn about oceans, or they really like, to learn about a certain breed of animal, whatever it is? I've had students in the past who, and I've taught different subjects over the years, whether it was social studies or English language arts at for the older scholars. And I've had students come into class with so much knowledge on one specific area. And sometimes teachers go, well, where did that child learn all that? Why do they learn? And so we'll ask them and say, how did you learn so much about World War II weapons, Jimmy? That's a made up name. Oh, I watch, History Channel all the time. My grandfather was in, a war and talks to me about it. I'm so interested in this. I really want to learn more about this. And if I wouldn't have asked him, where did you learn about it? How would I have known? So really we want to take the time, see what clothes a child gravitates towards when you're at Target or Macy's or Old Navy or wherever you buy your clothes or online. Do they have characters on them? What websites is your child gravitating towards? What channel is your child when they get the remote going towards? Who in your family does your child gravitate towards when there's a larger family gathering, and why? So all of these things give us little bits of data that help us as we form our data collection. And I do encourage you to start small and decide, are you going to do digital or paper or both? Because before you know it, it's March or April, it's annual review time. And then you're like, wow, I remember I had this information in October, But then, and I knew in September that I was looking for possible regression about, after ESY and what's going on or no ESY. And then before you know it, it's March or April and you're wondering where all your data went. So take a PDF of a staff email that a teacher sends. If work samples come home that have to be returned or a daily note, take a picture, email it to yourself. Those progress reports are really, really important, right? Keep keep sort of a tabs on the consistency of the progress report, the work samples, grades, and everything. And just keep and start looking for trends. If you see any discrepancy, like, wow, they're doing really well in their math homework, they're flying through it, but their progress report says something different, or the opposite. They're struggling with their math homework and something is coming home talking about strengths. So again, when I talk about data collection here, it's not just about strengths, it's overall. Keep on top of your data. And again, don't let it control you. Don't take 2 hours a week, just literally a few minutes a week of keeping track of what's going on to look for trends. Because then when you do have the annual review, you have everything together, whether it's in, a Google document. If you take comments from teachers and just cut and paste them and put them in a Google Doc, or take that email and go to hit print and save it as a PDF. You don't have to do anything fancy, but just keep track and look for those strength words. Look for those comments from teachers. Look for those, well, they tried really hard, they did really well, they did really well on the field trip. If they're doing really well on field trips or really well on, community outings or really well in specials for the younger students, and then their LRE time doesn't match that, look for that. Look, as you're doing your data collection, look for strengths, look for those words, those positive words, and then make sure everything's aligned. Make sure the message that you're getting is showing the totality of your child. And again, this is not a finite list. I just wanted to kind of give you some categories of where you can mine your data, so to speak. Homework engagement, that's something you're directly observing. And again, I don't want you to add to your, you're already super busy. It's back to school time. We have Labor Day weekend coming up. You have, the potluck down the street. You have, PTA flyer coming home. You're super busy. I don't want to add to your to-do list, but these are just some areas to keep an eye out for as you assemble your totality, your list of your child's strengths. Homework engagement is a key one because it's a structured setting where your child has to do a certain task and has to do it at typically the same time every day, not necessarily, and it's not usually once a week. And by that same token, if your child isn't getting the same amount of homework as some of their non-disabled peers, ask about that because they should be. Are they completing it? Is it taking hours and hours? Or when they do complete it after whatever time, it's very, very good and it isn't consistent with what they're doing in class, or maybe it is. I have no idea. Verbal comments. Again, in these low stakes environments, when you're talking to your child, maybe, you're looking at a book or you're watching TV together and you're asking questions. What's your child, what vocabulary words are they using? Again, we already talked about community activities. When I say work samples, a lot of clients ask me, what do you mean by work samples? And I'm looking for graded work that has comments on it in different classes, right? So what the teacher is using to get those grades, right? Maybe it's a writing sample for the younger children, like you can see the handwriting. Maybe you want to see how they're doing in OT. Maybe it's for an older child, it's a longer writing. Maybe it's some art. And then you want to know, was this done independently? Was this done with assistance? How many prompts? Oh, good. They have less prompts than last year. That's a strength. Those daily notes from the teachers, again, just snap a picture with your cell phone and email it to yourself. Teacher emails are a treasure trove. This is the sleeper area. I repeat, this is the sleeper area. Often this has great information, but it fails to make its way for whatever reason into the IEP. So please check those. Please keep those. Please highlight whatever you do, because once the annual review comes and they're not mentioning, oh, they're working with fewer prompts, they're going to specials independently or whatever, but that's in the teacher email, make sure that goes into the IEP. Make sure it goes into present level. Oh, I noticed that Miss Smith said that, Connor is working much better and doing much more work without additional prompts. Okay, that's in an email that needs to go into the IEP. Attendance, let's give our scholars credit, but if for whatever reason they can't make it, whether it's illness or whatever, just keep track of that. But if they do say, I want to go to school no matter what, and you say, well, are you feeling okay? Put that in as a strength. And again, preferences. Some students have really strong preferences, and people go, why would you put in preferences? Everybody has preferences, because you're looking at the why of the preference. Why does that child love a certain area? I taught in an acute unit years ago and a partial hospitalization unit. And some of the children, when I would have like free reading time, they would tell me what they were interested in. One summer I taught rising ninth graders, who some of them I had taught during the year and I was a middle school team leader. I taught reading, and I was like, what are the preferences? Some of the young ladies preferred, for whatever reason, different magazines. So I went and got, appropriate, like Teen Vogue, different things. Some of the fellas and some of the ladies preferred like a Nintendo Power or something. I think that's what it was called, those different magazines. So I went and got those magazines because I was teaching reading in summer school, and it was like 7:30 to 12:30. That's a long block of time, and it wasn't ESY. So I was like, I need to really make sure I'm in tune with their preferences for their break time. So I told them, I know you want to talk, because I had taught some of them and I knew I said, I know we need a break. This is a long block. I'm bringing magazines. I'll bring snacks some days. You can get up and chat with your friends. Here are the magazines. But many of the children got up and got those magazines. Again, finding out their preferences and why. Why do you like this magazine? Oh, well, my cousin does makeup and I like to learn to do makeup. Great. That's a preference. That's a skill. When you open the door on preferences, you go in and you find out about skills and hobbies and more strengths. And then listen to those comments, people who say different things about your child, a positive thing. Wow, they're so helpful. They're so polite. They're so interested. Whether you're at, the library with our little ones and their story hour and they're attending and they're behaving and they're listening and they're not disrupting, all of that is very important. And again, this is not a finite list. You don't have to wait for the meeting to obtain information. This is a myth. This is a myth. By that same token, we want to respect and acknowledge that teachers are busy people, just like all of you are. And many of them, especially in the younger grades, they don't have planning time every day. So when you're giving them a request for work samples, I would make it like, dear Miss Smith, I really appreciate, how much work you're doing with, Tyler. Again, these are made up names. When you have a moment, that's a key phrase that will make the teacher really like you. When you have a moment in the next couple weeks, could I have, 3 to 5 work samples from, Randy, again, a made up name, or let me know if I should contact another teacher. Thank you so much for your help. So then it tells the teacher they have a couple weeks to put us together. You tell them how many. Again, I wouldn't ask for, everything every day. That's later if you ever need, some other serious thing and you need like a FERPA request. This is just to get like a little sample, a little sprinkling, if you will. Is there a rubric for that writing activity? Is there a sample of a quiz that the child did well on? Oh, I would love to see that. The teacher can take a picture and email, however they want to send it, or send it home in the backpack, and they may want it back for their file. So feel free to ask for that. So again, and I added for my last presentation, data from ESY is really important right now. You have that data, and I know not all our friends and scholars, for the parents that are here today, maybe attended extended school year, but that is really key data. The progress information, any comments that the staff made, any work samples, keep track of that. For a couple reasons, the data from ESY, both to see do they qualify next year, and again for strengths. ESY is a great environment for learning for many children because they have less transitions typically. It's very intense in terms of instructional focus. Teachers aren't being pulled for, 1,000 meetings or trainings, whatever. They're just there to instruct. So really get that information from ESY and then historical data. Look at prior IEPs. Look at what other teachers said. Look at what teachers said last year. Teachers may have said, wow, they're so well behaved. They're so polite. They're so engaged. They work without prompts. Look at that. The teacher right now for your child doesn't have that historical data. That's your hard drive. That's in your brain. Make sure you acknowledge that. Find those strengths in there. Data across providers. What does the OT say? What does the speech and language pathologist say? And what about settings? Like I said, how is a child out on the field trip? How are they, in the cafeteria? How are they at recess? How are they when there's a substitute? Across settings, if they're polite, responsive, engaged, following directions across settings, especially in general education, for those of you who have children that are in general education for some part of the day, that's important. And data at home. Don't sleep on that data at home, even if the school tells you we need to see that skill in school. If you're audio taping or even video, like from the back, I don't really like people that are, I don't really necessarily agree with sending videotapes with the face shown to a school because we don't know about, there could be a hack in a year, whatever. But if you ever want to videotape like just your child actually doing the homework to show like the piece of paper and their arm literally to show, oh, they did get started with one prompt on their math. They did finish all of these independently. Because I don't want to say it's suspicion, but there is a sort of belief I've seen in some school teams, well, we know, that little Sally can do this, but we need to see it at school. So then when you show an audio, when you have an audio tape of your child reading or a video just showing like the work product without you quote unquote doing the work, then it proves to the school that your child can do that. And that is a strength area. I remember one year, I think it was my second year teaching, and the first graders for the whole school, I was in Montgomery County, small, not small, average elementary school, maybe 4 or 5 teachers per grade. The first graders had a housing unit, like a homes and what is a home, and they read books about houses, and they each had to bring a house, right? So you can imagine first graders making their own house. Really cute. Some of them took a shoebox and tried to glue windows on it. Really adorable. When I tell you this one child brought in something like only somebody with like a master's in architecture who had 30 hours a week to prepare. It was this massive structure that the child could barely carry. We all looked around. We didn't even need to say it out loud. The parent did a lot of the work, right? There was no way the finite, just the attention to detail. So when we say, oh, prove to us that that child did it, sometimes it's kind of obvious, like, okay, we know there was a lot of support and it's not even they're trying to cover it up. But when you do have, in all seriousness, an IEP team that says, well, we would love to acknowledge that and put that in present levels, but we don't have any data supporting it. This is your data. Your data is good data. Share that. And then I just talked about preferences. If some children love dogs versus cats, this versus that. Why? Oh, because I know this and that. And the last one is another what I call sleeper, technology use. How are they navigating their technology tools? iPads, phones, laptop, desktop, whatever your house, whatever you all use. How are they finding the websites they want to go on? How are they going to those different places? Do they know how to type in search bar? All of that is super important because it's very, very likely that someone is not monitoring that to that level of detail at school. Their technology skills. If you handed your child an iPad or any kind of tablet or your phone because you're at the grocery store and they don't have their phone or they're too young to have a phone or whatever, and you look over a minute later, what website are they on? How did they get there? Who told them they could, who taught them that? Or did they figure that out themselves? Again, very, very important for strengths. So before you go in to any meeting and you want to share strengths, let the team know, I have some things I want to share, and set your goals ahead of time. Say, I want to have this many minutes or this. And they say, well, we don't want to include that in an IEP. We'll include that in another document separately. No, it needs to go in the IEP. This is parent input. It should go somewhere in the IEP. But this should go under strengths. And what you want to do is ask information that you're not necessarily being given anyway, because a lot of times it's not offered because nobody asked. When a field trip happens, the next day, say there's a field trip on Wednesday, October 10th. I'm just making up a day. I don't even know if that's a Wednesday. Thursday, not every parent is emailing that teacher, how did my child do on a field trip? How did my child do? And they're busy. But at some point, ask within like a week or two. Oh, send a quick email. Hello, Miss Smith. Hope you're having a good day. I always say for email structure, start with something positive. I hope you're having a good day. A quick question. How was, Jonathan's behavior on the last field trip? Did he need a lot of prompts? Was he engaged? 2 or 3 questions. Thank you so much. Please let me know within the next few days. They will answer that. That's a data point. How are they in the hall? How are they in the cafeteria? Who do they interact with? How are they in specials? Excuse me. Unless you ask, you're not going to get this information often. And I don't mean asking for a functional behavioral assessment. I'm talking about just day to day. Again, don't wait for the meeting. Maybe once a month, just ask 1 or 2 of these questions just to get some data so that by that time March or April rolls around for that annual review, you have it. So make sure, like I said, that you should put that into the present levels of performance, or it's also known as the present levels of academic and functional performance, not just parent input. And then this is super important because the least restrictive environment discussion talks about what supports your child needs to remain in general education. And the law is very clear on this. The law clearly says only removed from general ed if those other supports, for general ed aren't basically, I don't want to, I'm paraphrasing, aren't necessarily, successful. So once the LRE and gen ed has been tried with these supports and that didn't work, then we're talking about resource or some kind of pull out or even, all day separate, however it is. But you want to make sure that you get information in about how your child interacts with others, how independent they are. Are there any behavior issues? Because you want to look at what additional adult support go on in general education for them to remain there. Because if they're very well behaved and they're just waiting for a prompt and they interact with others and they're polite, then they need a little bit more academic support in gen ed, which is different than, a child, and I'm being, sort of exaggerating or, on the extreme continuum is like throwing furniture and really, causing commotions and being, I don't like using adjectives, but being disruptive. Then there is more justification for saying general ed right now for little Freddie, again, made up names, isn't working, right? So again, you want to get this strength information as one of the reasons to justify remaining in gen ed. This is something when I say final thoughts, I go into this in a lot of detail, actually. The Andrew F. case. And this talks about progress for a child that is at their level, right? Is meaningful based on their individual needs. So I encourage you, sometime in the next few weeks, get yourself a mocktail or a decaf espresso. It's a long document, and I'm giving you the link to the actual Supreme Court website. This is an important case for a few reasons. So basically, it was about 2016 or so, 2017, around that time period from this case. Little friend and Jeff in Colorado. The parents saw they were simply moving him along year after year. He was not making progress. They were not looking at his individualized needs and making things meaningful for him. And prior to this, the biggest case, one of the biggest case, not the biggest case, one of the biggest cases, one of the most frequently cited precedent, it was, I don't want to say the most frequently cited precedent, but a big case was the Rowley case, Rowley, which I'll go into a little bit on that. That was for a young lady in one of the New England states, and her educational disability had to do with her hearing. And the case involved whether or not, excuse me, she was making maximum progress to her maximum potential. And the court said, well, special ed doesn't need to do that. Special ed is to basically, in a nutshell, for lack of a better term, give access. Then comes along Andrew, where technically it's access. He just had the same goals every year, wasn't progressing. They were moving him on. And the Supreme Court said, wait a minute, let's rethink what this whole sort of, this whole mandate of special ed is about. And if it's not about children making meaningful progress at their level, then what is the purpose? So they say, no, it is not just de minimis. We have to show meaningful progress at their individual level. Another huge thing is parent input. Parent input, and again, we've gone through, different things you can look for strengths. Parent input is key because parent participation is required. Notice they can't have any IEP meetings without a parent, right? So parent participation is required for any IEP meeting, correct? So why are you there if not to share information, if not to share strengths, if not to share data, if not to share why you think your child can have more time in the least restrictive environment of general education. So again, if you have some time in the next 6 weeks, just even read a couple pages a day because it is a longer document. But I think it's important to read the original case from the Supreme Court because it is showing their thought process. And also school districts, some of them may still cite the Raleigh case, but really we are looking for meaningful progress based on your student's individualized level. So I'm going to go back a few slides because we have time and I want to maybe go through a possible example of what that looks like. So if you're going into a meeting and we'll just make up, a pretend student, we'll call her Adrian. I've never had a student named Adrian, so I picked that. And we're saying you're a parent in an IEP meeting. And typically they're going to send you an email and they're going to say, here's a parent input form. Please fill it out before the meeting. The meeting is next week or whenever you guys have agreed upon. And you get to the IEP meeting, and I've been in enough of them, probably at this point over 1,000, but hundreds and hundreds of the structure of the meeting, right? They start and they want to hear from the general ed teacher, or they want to hear from the classroom teacher if the child isn't in general ed. How are they doing? Okay, here's what they're doing, da da da, but we still need to do XYZ for support. Okay, let's look at their grades. Let's look at their IEP progress report. Often they don't discuss ESY and how they did in ESY in the annual review. So make sure, if I'm a Adrian, a third grader, the third grade parent would say, oh, and Adrian did really well in extended school year, and I have some writing samples that she did. And again, she has direct instruction. Often there's a lower staff to student ratio, right? You might have 12 students with a teacher and two instructional assistants or not. It varies upon, district. It varies building to building. And here are some writing samples she did in extended school year. And it's clear that she is able to write sentences if she has a word bank. It's clear she is able to write sentences when she has picture prompts. It's clear she was attentive during the read aloud. So again, 3 data points right there, right? Her capabilities, so she's able to do a task, and maybe she was or wasn't doing that task during the school year, but it's important that we have reinforcing data from another provider, right? And then also engaging the behavior, because you do see, unfortunately, the way this connects with having your child's IEP improve and be more strength-based and be more thorough is unfortunately too many present levels of performance sections, and not everybody. There are some wonderful ones out there, and special ed teachers are working hard, and I want to shout out all teachers now because there are teacher shortages and they work really hard and they, don't get paid overtime, and shout out to all their wonderful efforts, that they're including qualitative data, not quantitative data. So you want to bring your quantitative data, right? You want to say, wow, in extended school year, this is how many sentences Adrian was able to write with adult support. And when they come back, because it is a little bit of a back and forth sometimes, say, oh, well, it sounds like she had a lot more adult support there. Were they doing the work for her? What were those prompts looking like? Were they helping her with spelling? Again, you want to find that out right at the end of ESY, because if you have those wonderful ESY work samples, you really want to include those and go, wow, Adrian was able to sit and listen to, for our younger scholars that have to sit and listen, was able to sit and listen to do this and really responded. And when we're hearing about, oh, well, the student had all these prompts and they couldn't do it without prompts, is that prompt, you want to ask questions, because you have your data from homework. And you have your data from what do those prompts look like? Is the prompt get started? That's very different than the prompt is, oh, let's go back and try to find the answer. So is the prompt a task-based move you along prompt? Or is the prompt a sort of cognitive load, doesn't maybe have clarity on the question prompt? You really want to ask those questions. So the more data you bring and the more nouns and verbs you have with, my child was able to do this many times. Here are some work samples from homework. Here is an audio tape of me handing them the math homework and saying, please get started. Let's try the first 5 on our own. And then, hearing the child, and then you take a picture of it or a videotape without their face. Again, that data is really important because you don't want your data devalued, right? So again, with this sample with Adrian, you can say, in private OT, she's able to do XYZ. In private speech, she's doing this. Excuse me. When she's over at her grandmother's house, she sets the table without being asked. She will go and get the dog leash to walk the dog when the dog gets up in the morning without being prompted. So when the team is coming back and saying, and trying to qualify it and say, oh, but they need so many prompts to do this. Again, go back to that Andrew case. This is supposed to be meaningful for your child's individual progress and your child's level of functioning. So you want to bring that data. And if the data is inconsistent, where Adrian is working at the kitchen table and doing all her math with one prompt to get started, that's very different than them saying, no, she needs math prompts. She needs to know which digit to, where to start the problem. She doesn't understand, addition isn't the same as subtract, or whatever they're saying. The more data you have, and again, the purpose isn't to get into an argument with them. The purpose is to have a thorough picture of your child's functioning, right? So you want to know what the child is doing across settings. Because the other thing you can do, if there's something, I'm not being flippant, magical going on at home, that Adrian is doing all this math without these prompts, then what is that? Is it because there's music in the background? Is it because she just had her snack? Is it because she just came home, went to, the park with her sister, and then came back, and took a break and then did it? Because maybe then she needs a break right before she does the work at school. So you want to know under what conditions and across what settings. So if she's at home, is she at a quiet table? Does she have her headphones on? Some of our friends and scholars do better with headphones on. They have music in the background and that helps them focus. Some of our friends and scholars, especially with executive functioning and ADHD. And so what are the conditions that the child is working under that they are producing? So your data is so important, because then they can, if they say, well, we don't see that at school, well, maybe we can try to work on that and duplicate those conditions more at school, so that, okay, maybe she already had her snack, she had her break, she got to go, do one lap in the hall. Now she's ready to work. She sits, here's the prompt you give, like, I know you can do it. And then she starts her math. And the preferences. Are they even asking about preferences at school? One of the things I would like to do as a teacher is do 3 to 5 sentence surveys for students to find out what do they like and why. And sometimes I would incorporate that into my, instruction. My last year teaching, I was virtual. It was a Virginia school system. And for some of my warm-ups, and I was doing 8th grade, I might ask something like, when you're 30, what car would you like to be? And I got some really good answers. And then I would say, why? And a lot of our friends and scholars wanted to have, and that was the 2020-2021 school year. So we were in the pandemic. A lot of our friends and scholars wanted a BMW. A few wanted a Lamborghini, but most of them wanted a Tesla. So it's real interesting. interesting to find that data point. Like many of them, I'd say, and then I would say, why? For a preference, why do you want that? Oh, I like the way the design looks. Oh, so you like design. Don't just ask for the preference, ask for the why for the preference. Another question I would ask is, when you're 30, who do you want to live with? And again, for our older friends and scholars, we're starting to get into transition questions. We're starting to find out. This is part of our mandate to get transition data, finding out, where do you want to work? Who do you want to live with? Where do you want to live? And then we want to ask the why. Oh, well, some of them say, when I'm 25, I want to live at home with my parents and go to college. And I'd say, why? Oh, because, I'm really close with my mom, or I'll miss my little sister, or I really like where we live. And then some say, no, I want to live in New York when I'm, 30. I say, why? Oh, my cousin lives there. I want to try living on my own, but I'll live in an apartment with my cousin. I'll say, do you want to have a car in New York? No, there's too many cars. So again, not just the preferences, but the why for the preferences. It's really, really important to ask students. It could be the difference between, do you want this food or that food? Do you want to wear this color or that color? Do you want to go to the museum or the zoo? And then say, okay, well, why? Oh, because I really like tigers. I really want to see, the elephants. Or no, I don't want to go to the zoo. It's really loud and scary. And some of the, the smells of the elephant house. So again, you find out information about strengths, and you might find some information out about needs too, and that can go in present levels. But the more we ask, the more we find out, because often we're not asking questions. So we don't know the why. Same with technology use. Oh, why did you choose that website? Oh, well, my friend and I know cell phone usage is evolving at school. So it's a much different landscape now than it was last school year. Maybe their friend on the bus was on a certain YouTube channel. Maybe their friend at, aftercare, I'm not sure about cell phone use at aftercare, so I don't know, on, looking at Roblox or whatever it is. So technology use, same thing. Find out the why, and then also, well, how did you get to that website? How did you know to find out about that YouTube person that does XYZ? Because I remember one of my last years of in-person teaching, I remember elementary lunch duty. You find so much information out about our friends and scholars at lunch duty. And one of them, who was very talkative, I said, hey, what do you want to do when you grow up? What are you going to do when you graduate? He said, I want to be a YouTuber. I said, oh, and then I say, why? Oh, because they make a lot of money. So then that tells me what they value, right? I said, oh, what else? I said, a lot of jobs make a lot of money. Well, you get to be, you get to entertain people. Oh, so you like to entertain people. Again, one question leads to another, leads to another. So is it a hard job to be a YouTuber? Do you know a lot about being a YouTuber? Well, I know that so and so said that this person makes this amount of money. So sometimes it's getting the education to that student. Go, oh, well, also please consider, you're really good at speaking. Maybe you could be a newscaster. Maybe you could be an entrepreneur. Maybe you could be an attorney. Have you ever thought of that? So we're looking at preferences, but we're also looking at strengths. I know I've said to certain students, oh, I think you'd be really good at, you seem really good at working with little ones. Would you consider teaching? Well, my mom said I might be a good teacher, but I'm not sure. Well, do you prefer it? I know you're good at it, but do you prefer it? Well, I'm not sure. I've had kids say they're going to get on my nerves. I don't think I'd be a good teacher. I said, well, just think about it. And they'll say, oh, I want to be a lawyer or a doctor, football. A lot of them want to be football players. A lot of them want to be police officers. Some of them want to be, YouTubers. Those were three of the big ones. There was one really sweet little boy in third grade. I said, what do you want to be when you grow up? He goes, I'm going to be a police officer. I said, oh, are you sure? He said, yes. He said, yes, Miss Capone. He said, it is my destiny. And I said, well, thank you for telling me. And I had to call mom that week because I didn't know this child knew the word destiny. He's like, it's my fate, it's my destiny. I said, that's an amazing vocabulary word. So again, having those discussions, interacting with children and those off times, not to put them on the spot, but it's important for children of all ages. And it's especially important for our older friends and scholars, because we really need to help them narrow down what they're good at, what they want to do, give them that skill set. Say, oh, well, you want to work with animals. Have you ever considered volunteering at a pet shelter? Well, what's a pet shelter? How do you volunteer? How do you sign up? Just all of those details. So really finding out preferences and looking for any roadblocks that prevent the preferences from turning into something that they're actually able to demonstrate. If a child does love dogs, like that young man I mentioned that loved Chihuahuas, I was able to do a community service field trip at the end of that school year, but they said I could only bring 12. It was to a local pet shelter, and it was actually great because it was within walking distance from the charter school in DC where I was. And I said, only 12. I said, I know I have more than 12 that want to go. But people said, well, how are you going to pick, Liz? You have this many. I said, I'm going to go by first come, first serve, and it's by preference. I said, because I want to go with the kids that really are interested in it. And we had a group and I'll close with this. We had a group that was grouped by preference. And many of those students, they may have been in maybe one or two classes together or not. Some of them never really interacted very frequently at all. So it's a very sort of, very eclectic group, I will say that. And we walked over, and I was the only adult. And some of them didn't have amazing behavior back at school all the time, but they had that united sort of area of interest. And so we got there. So you saw a student who maybe, was hanging out with maybe more older kids, more 16, 17-year-old, more acting, a little bit more, more mature. And then we had some kids who really acted a little, younger, almost like they were still in middle school, but they all loved animals. And that brought them together, and it gave them a chance to interact on the way back and talk to each other. Oh, did you see that one pit bull? Oh, did you see that rabbit? And it gave them a chance to have more authentic interaction. So I will close with this. When you look at preferences and you find out what students are good at, it gives them a chance to interact with non-disabled peers. And then the non-disabled peers go, oh, I didn't know you really liked, XYZ, because the school had students, we were all inclusion, so we didn't have any pullout. So I took a random group of 12. Some were on IEPs and some weren't. That wasn't a criteria or considered at all. But definitely hearing them come back, and then we had lunch in the cafeteria together after we came back. It gave them a bond to have a topic to discuss from then on. And if I hadn't have given them that opportunity to interact about their preference, I don't believe those students would have had that chance. I don't think they would have had that authentic conversation. So we walked over. The leader, she did a whole presentation to the 12 of them. They were very well behaved. She talked about the shelter. She talked about, how many are there at any given time. And then she's like, we're about to go tour. We're going to, meet the dogs, meet the cats, meet the other animals. And they were very excited because just 12. This isn't, normally our field trips were, the whole school. So, or the whole, grade level. So this was very select. And again, they were looking at each other like, well, normally they're not going to sit together at lunch. So give your child the opportunity to share preferences, because that can be a window into them having more interaction with children that maybe they wouldn't have interacted with normally. So I hope this presentation has given you kind of an overview of an area that I think people don't necessarily delve into, because they think, oh, if I'm going to talk about strengths, then they'll give my child less services, or that's not an area they're interested in because they're not going to write a goal about it. Go ahead and give the information about strengths, because that can be the sounding, sort of the springboard for further discussion. That can be the start of a sounding board for your child to share more information. So I really appreciate the opportunity to present. I always have to put a corgi picture in. I don't own a corgi, but I find them adorable. I don't know, Jan's a big dog person, so I just had to put that in there. And I think now I will stop sharing slides. I did put my contact information in here with the St. Bernard. I put the St. Bernard with the barrel because I know a lot of parents, they're going in and helping their child, and they have that sort of IEP toolkit around their neck. So I just wanted to give you one more thing to put in your St. Bernard barrel to talk about strengths.
I'm going to stop recording.
Okay, and I stopped sharing.